So I initially had no intention of making or sharing this video, but after innumerable requests and questions about my XAT attempt strategy, I'm quickly sitting down to make this video and putting it out as fast as I can so that you can copy my complete XAT attempt strategy for the exam on Sunday and convert what I believe is one of the best B schools in the country after IIM Ahmedabad, Bangalore and Calcutta. Hi everyone, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Priya Chatterjee Ray and I took the XAT exam in 2021. I scored a 99.98 percentile in the exam. However, I didn't join XLRI, which is the B school I was talking about, because that year I also converted IIM Ahmedabad and I decided to join that instead, where I graduated from last year. But that's enough about me. Now we're just going to quickly rapid fire our way through the basic points that I wanted to make about this video. Okay, so a lot of people will tell you, and you must have seen on all these CAT websites, CAT and XAT advice websites as well, 40 to 45 marks is what you need to get a 99 percentile. The catch here is that many people, even after receiving 99 percentile scores, do not end up getting calls or converting some grade B schools because of one minor mistake they make. That mistake is not clearing sectional cutoffs. Now, XAT is different from CAT in the way that it doesn't have any time limits for any sections, which means it's a free-for-all buffet. You can attempt any question in any order, any section in any order you want. Now, the way to deal with this problem and to not miss out on the sectional scores, which usually rest at around 8 or 9 questions, is to make sure that you give ample amount of time to each section. In my opinion, this should be at least 45 minutes per section, and then you can decide on how much time you want to give each section based on your strengths and weaknesses. So what I did was give 50 minutes for VARC, which is my strong section, then give 50 minutes for decision making and leave the rest of the time for QA, because that was my weakest section and I wanted to take my time to solve the sums that come in XAT, because they tend to be longer and a little more complicated than whatever comes in CAT. So this was also specifically the order that I followed in solving it, going with my strongest section VARC first, then moving into decision making, and then moving into QA. So I would suggest that you do the same and you pick your strongest section to start with. You can decide if you want to give it more time than the rest of the sections if you want that, but you should start with your strongest section. Now, if you believe that decision making is your strongest section, I would strongly advise you to not start with decision making, for the simple reason that it tends to be very lengthy as compared to the other sections. You have to read a lot and it can get very confusing because it is quite an open-ended section to solve. So I wouldn't suggest starting with decision making, and because you tend to get lost in the reading and you tend to lose track of time, which is something that can be very scary. On that note of losing track of time, I would suggest that no matter what, you start your final section at the 140th minute mark and not a second later than that. 140 minutes would mean 2 hours and 20 minutes. No matter what happens, don't delay further than that, because you won't be able to clear the sectional cutoff if you push it any further. Moving on to the next point, you would have heard a lot of hullabaloo about getting minus 0.1's penalty after skipping 8 questions. Now, this doesn't mean 8 questions in one section or 8 subsequent or consequent, I don't know, 8 questions that come one after the other. It means 8 questions overall. And a lot of people I've seen have suggested that, you shouldn't skip more than 8 questions. I think that's a lot of bullcrap. It is at the end of the day a competitive exam and you have to make sure that you are playing to your strengths. So don't try to solve extra questions because you are scared of that 0.1 penalty. It doesn't matter. That 0.1 will not affect you too much. A good number of attempts for you to make in this paper are 60 at max, I think, because that is the number you should be able to solve to get a net correct of 45 questions depending on your accuracy. So even if you attempt 60 questions, I think that's enough. You don't have to worry so much about the 0.1 penalty, because that 0.1 is not what's important. What's important is the amount of time you will spend trying to solve an extra question, and that is your most scarce resource. So the next advice would be to attempt around 60 questions and not worry about the penalty you will get for questions left unattempted. Okay, now moving on to the next thing. The good thing about XAT is that you only get a penalty of minus 0.25 for getting a question wrong. So that means that instead of losing 1/3 marks, you lose 1/4 marks. Again, this means that you can attempt more questions and you can be a little more daring with your guesses. If you want, you can make educated guesses and increase your number of attempts. But for the at the risk of repeating myself again and again, don't attempt questions just because you're trying to avoid the minus 0.1 penalty. But if you are in a question where you are torn between two options, you can go ahead and tick it because the amount of marks you're losing is less compared to what you were losing in CAT. So you can be a little more risk-taking in this exam. Okay, on my next point, remember that I said that you should solve around 60 questions in this paper. That means you get roughly 3 minutes per question. But like I said in the beginning, you don't get sectional breaks. So you have to make sure that you're on track throughout the paper so that you don't miss out on the number of questions attempted or you don't miss out on any sectional cutoffs. So I would suggest that you take a mental note of this, and at every 30-minute mark you make sure that you have solved at least 10 questions, and if you haven't, you try to improve your speed going forward or try to increase the number of questions you do in the next 30 minutes. So basically what that means is after 30 minutes you should have finished 10 questions, after an hour you should have finished 20 questions, after an hour and a half you should have finished 30 questions, so on and so forth. Okay, just 3 last pieces of advice for the individual sections. Let's talk about VARC. I've been getting a lot of questions about poem RC specifically, and I would personally ask you to avoid them. Poems are very difficult concepts to understand in general. Like, people spend hours and years in classrooms trying to understand the true meaning behind what a poet meant in like 2 lines, and you honestly don't have the time to do that in the XAT exam. So it's complicated. I would suggest that you skip it. It's not worth it to break your head over something a poet said many years ago. It's very, very difficult to get that right. Second is the order of attempting VARC. I would suggest that you start with the grammar questions first because they tend to be the easiest. And then you move on to the RC questions, and then you do the critical reasoning questions, if any at all. So the third piece of advice is both good news and bad news. Bad news because the passages are longer in XAT and they tend to be more complex, so you will end up taking more time reading those passages. But this is also good because XAT tends to ask more direct questions because of the length of their passages. So when you're attempting the RCs, what you should do is you should skim the questions first and then start reading the passage so that you can solve those direct questions easily. Okay, so quickly moving along to the decision-making section. Now, the first thing to remember about DM is that it is the exact opposite in terms of complexity of VRC. Like I said, VRC sets, because the RCs are longer, you get direct questions. I've heard a lot of people talk about how you should go for the longer sets in DM because those sets tend to be easier. I don't think that's true. I think you should definitely go for the shorter sets for 2 reasons. First, because there are fewer number of stakeholders in those sets, so you can you have to deal with fewer people. And 2, and more importantly, it's easier because it takes lesser reading time. The problem with the decision making section is that you tend to lose track of time in it. Like I've said before, you spend too much time trying to understand what's happening and then fighting with yourself about what the correct answer is, so that can get very complicated very fast. So instead of going for these long winding sets, just to choose the shorter ones and move on. So the next point is that a lot of people have been asking me if there's any specific mantra to crack a DM set. I can't tell you if there's any set mantra. I can just tell you what I had done, which is use one of these 2 ways. First is that I went with a stakeholder analysis. So I tried to find that answer which helped the maximum number of people. So if one solution was helping 6 people, as in 6 different stakeholders, so it was making money for the investors, it was also helping the CEO, it was also helping the consumers, but it wasn't, say, helping one person or one stakeholder. As long as it was helping more number of people than it wasn't, I would choose that option. For example, if a factory is burning and you can stop the factory from burning by letting one person die who is stuck in the office, then you should choose that option. Because more often than not, it's what tends to be true. There is an ethical argument behind it. I have forgotten the philosopher who came up with it. I think it's called the theory of utilitarianism, whatever it's called. But the third thing to remember is that decision-making sets are of 2 types. They're either business problems or the ethical dilemmas. In terms of business problems, you use the stakeholder analysis I've given you. And in terms of ethical dilemma, you should know that you should choose the option that is the most honorable thing to do. Like, put yourself in Yudhishthir's shoes or Ram's shoes from Ramayana or Mahabharata, and pick the one that you think they would pick, because that is the way out of an ethical dilemma. You do the grand thing to do. You don't think like a human, you think like a god, basically. Finally, moving on to the QADI section, 2 points here. First is to remember that the QA in XAT is tougher. The concepts are more complicated. They're stacked on top of each other. So not only is the problem a problem of profit and loss, there'll also be like some percentages or some ratio and proportion involved in it. It's got layers, so it gets mixed up. So if it were my choice in the exam, I would tell you to go for the DI sets, which tend to be more easier. Plus you can visualize the data, so it helps. And second, there are some very complicated calculation based questions which lots of people will tell you to avoid, but I will tell you to do the exact opposite. Attempt those calculation questions, because when you finish solving it, you can just plug in the answer in the question again to cross check and make sure that you've got it correct. And if you have the belief and you have the guarantee that the question is correct, it will just help with your own confidence. Okay, so that sums up my XAT attempt strategy. I have word for word told you exactly what I did in my papers so that you can replicate it in yours. I hope this helps. I'm sorry this video has come out in the middle of the night, I think is when I'm posting it, and I'm sorry that I'm speaking so fast, but I just wanted to quickly get all my points across so that it can reach the maximum number of people and reach you in time to make sure that you have the correct attempt strategy in place before the exam. That said, best of luck for your exam. I'm sure you'll do very well. And once that is over, make sure that we get started with our GDPI prep. I have left all details about the GDPI prep, including what to study, where to study from, how to do mocks, etc. in a video, which I will leave in somewhere here and in the description box below. And I'll soon start posting my interview transcripts, so stay tuned for that. Till then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, ring the notification bell, do all of that, and I'll see you next time.